Hi everyone, Mad Chatter here. First off, I'd like to thank everyone for helping me reach my goal of 1,000 subscribers. It's crazy to think how this passion project of mine has grown so much in under 2 years. And to celebrate, I've enlisted the help of some amazing narrators and authors for this 1K subscribers collab. Be sure to check out their content through the respected links in the description or pinned comment of this video. Now, without further delay, let's delve into the wonderland of horror.
Mama hates the 4th of July. The fireworks scare her. She says ever since she was a little girl, the brightness and the booming gets her heart racing. She won't take me down by the water to watch them, but I have a pretty good view if I crawl out the window and watch them from the roof. It's getting darker and darker, and they're about to start when I see someone walking toward the door below me. Daddy's home. He's coming back from hunting, and he must have caught a rabbit for stew, because he's got something dripping red through the cloth bag slung on his shoulder next to his rifle. They're about to start the fireworks show. I hope they do the big loud red ones. The window to my parents' room is still open, and I catch little bursts of what they're talking about. They keep saying something about my mom's friend Bill. Maybe, just maybe, he's going to join us for dinner. Suddenly, the first explosion happens in the sky. Boom. Mama must be scareder of the fireworks than normal, because she's crying and making screeching noises. Daddy will make her feel better. Boom, boom, boom. Red ones, glitter ones, multicolored ones, all the ones I like. They're so loud, it feels like the booming is right next to me. I think Mama is finally starting to like them a little, because her whimpering stopped a minute or two ago. Now, it's real quiet below. Just Daddy's boots pacing back and forth on the creaky floorboards. I love the 4th of July so much. The loudness, and the light, and the brightness, and the booming.
You've probably never heard about him, the Abominable Toeman. Ask people around these parts though and you'll get at least a dozen different stories about him, all of which are utterly ridiculous. Some say he was a nighttime lurker, a fetish chaser. He'd break into young women's homes at night, sneak into their bedrooms, and suck on their toes. According to some local legends, he had a particular penchant for foot fungus, like the way it tasted. Others, though, claim he was a freak of nature, possibly a failed lab experiment, or a mutated aberration of some kind. A creature of innumerable appendages, all of which were variations of toes. He'd crawl around like a centipede on thousands of little piggies, prowling the deep woods by Fletcher's solitude. Woe be the day you smell those toes. By the time you did, it was already too late. The truth, though, is far simpler in nature, or perhaps more intricate. I suppose it depends on how you see it. The county sheriff covered up most of it, you see. Only a handful of people ever knew, and only certain details deemed unimportant was ever leaked to the press. I had some connections in the department, though, and being an investigative journalist at the time, I knew I was onto something big when old John Colliker, drunk as several skunks and then some, told me the truth about the Abominable Toeman. He'd claimed 5 victims at that point, and the 6th and last was right around the corner. They found them tied up to chairs in seemingly random locations, dried black streams of blood running from their mouths. The victims were more or less unharmed, some minor surface wounds, but nothing too severe. Except for the feet, of course. It varied from victim to victim, you see. How many toes were missing? The first one had 3 missing, the second, 5. All severed rather crudely, probably using diagonal pliers of some sturdy design. but the blood loss from those wounds still wasn't enough to explain the cause of death. But the autopsies revealed all. You see, the abominable toe man was a sick fucker. He liked to cut off his victims' toes and feed them to them. Made them eat them, chew them, swallow them. I don't know about you, but chewing on my own toes isn't something I'd willingly do. So most of the victims had attempted to swallow them whole, and choked to death on them. They never caught him, you know. After the sixth and final victim, he disappeared, just stopped and upped and vanished. I suppose he was satisfied. Got what he came for. Something to that effect anyway. Why am I telling you all this? Well, you asked, didn't you? How I lost my feet? It's rather simple, isn't it? Quite obvious, really. I finished my meal.
In-Laws by J. DeShane. It was a rainy day in spring when we buried our Sarah. Rainy and cold, not unlike the girl herself when she'd first come to join our family. She was beautiful, yes, as beautiful as my son, Hosea, deserved, but there was an iciness about her. I wanted to love her as a mother should. I tried. God knows I tried. Many times throughout their short marriage, I would offer my service and knowledge to her. Each time, she refused. She was polite enough, of course, but her eyes. There was a blankness in them that sent a tingle up my spine. God forgive me, but I was more relieved than not when she died. Naturally, my relief was, in part, because she had been so ill for weeks and now seemed well past her agonies. But of course, that wasn't all. Mostly, I felt as if God had reached down and lifted what would have surely been a great, dark weight on my poor son's life. He had always been such a warm and loving boy. He deserved so much more than a wife like Sarah. It was because of the lightness I felt at Sarah's passing that I had barely any tears to cry as my 3 sons and their father carried Sarah's coffin out into the field. I walked behind them, side by side with Lydia, the wife of my eldest, Zachary. Though we had never spoken openly on the subject, I was sure our opinion of Sarah had been the same. Lydia knew how to be a loving wife. A year and a half into her marriage, she was already carrying my 2nd grandchild. Who knows how long it would have taken Sarah to fulfill her wifely promise. At last, we reached the place where poor Sarah would rest forever. The men had toiled late into the night, preparing the spot which now lay open and deep, a mound of earth heaped beside it. Here, they set the coffin down. My husband, ever the solemn leader of this family, took his place at the head, Holy Bible in hand, and was flanked soon after by Zachary and his brother, Paul, each with their shovels, ready to act. Hosea, the picture of despondent grief, took his place beside me at the foot of the coffin. It pained me to see him in such a condition, but it is true what the good book says. All things work together for good. This we would soon find out. Halfway through my husband's reading, a strange sound rose to our ears. He fell silent. Those in attendance looked from one person to another, asking without words if anyone but they themselves had heard the noise. It came again. A groaning. There was no mistaking it. All eyes fixated on the source of the noise. Sarah's coffin. After a moment, the groaning gave way to a different sort of sound, one that was more structured, more like language in nature. The wooden box that enclosed Sarah muffled and obscured her words, and before long they were not words anymore. Dampened screams soon issued forth from the coffin. Screams, scratches, and knocks came at a frantic pace as the structure began to shake and rock. It could not be denied. The woman we thought had died now clawed at the lid of her own coffin, which had been nailed shut over her just moments prior. All gazes now moved to Hosea. He had told us she was dead. He had tended to her during her sickness, allowing no one else, including myself, to do so. How could he have made such a blunder? His eyes told the story. I know my son's face well enough. In those eyes, I saw shock, fear, and guilt. I knew in an instant what had taken place. We all did. I followed Hosea's gaze to his father. There, I'm sure we both expected to find a Christ-like scowl of judgment. Instead, we saw a soft, forgiving smile, the very face of understanding. And so it was settled. The gentleman hurriedly placed the coffin into the waiting ground. Sarah's enclosed screams could still be heard as they dropped the earth upon her with the shovels they had, and Lydia and I ran off to fetch 2 more.
Just one bite. Just one bite. I promised myself that I would stop at one. One victim, one bite. Yet, we do not always keep the promises we make. I stared down at you, lying hopelessly on the ground. The wound on your neck is fresh. I could even see the marks made with my teeth. I could hear the frantic heartbeat as the blood began to seep from the wound. The pulsing was becoming weaker. The stream of blood was slowing down, and I knew that she was on death's door. Her heart was weak. My hand reached out timidly at first, as though to try to feebly stop the blood in a lazy attempt to preserve her life. I knew I should do this. Why was the art of killing so intoxicating? It was better than anything else. Drugs? Perhaps this was mine. Sex? I had never reached my peak like I have when I bite my prey. The first bite is always the best. It was supposed to be my last. Instantly, I felt the warmth of the liquid compared to the coolness of her skin. Her auburn hair now dark with blood. She barely made a sound other than a small whimper. Taken by surprise, she did not have a chance to fight nor flee. Instead, her eyes gazed up at me in awe, confused and desire. I turned to my hand so I could look at my fingertips. The telltale color of blood. My senses were heightened. The 2 most intoxicating things were the scent and the taste. As though driven by a spell, my fingers soon entered my mouth. I sucked the blood hungrily from them. Again, once I had the taste, I could not stop myself and knelt in the spilled blood. My arms wrapped around her dying form, and she reached up to touch my face. I don't know if she was thanking me for ending her suffering or trying to prevent me from feasting on her neck. My hand rested on top of hers for a moment. Her jade-colored eyes studied mine, searching, desperately seeking something that I could not decipher. I took her gently by the chin, turned her head to the side to expose her soft and marked neck to me. I leaned. Blood and the metallic fragrance filled my nostrils with an ancient desire. Lips parted, and I sucked the blood from her as the life finally left her. I was still ravenous for more, and I had wasted far too much of her blood. I drank hungrily, taking in mouthfuls of the rich liquid, swallowed and gulped it down more. Finally, her body was drained and I released her. The drained body slumped downwards, lifeless. I looked down at her before guiltily closing her eyelids. Those green eyes will forever haunt me, much like all the others do when I am not on the hunt. My hunger has not stopped. My hunt continues. I stepped out of the secluded alleyway. The people on the busy streets did not notice the deceased woman nor the blood on my lips. They likely thought it was lipstick. My footsteps joined the rest of the people's. I could hear snippets of their conversations and took glimpses into their lives. Talk of their families, friends, highs and lows. It was all idle chatter. My hands trembled as I felt the sensation rise inside of me again. My eyes darted around. Finding the ideal prey was the most time-consuming part. They needed to be easily forgotten. Someone whose society could not excuse mistreatment or possibly blame for being harmed. I loathe myself for thinking like this. I'm a good person. I just have a condition that makes me do this. I can't help it. I see someone. She is walking alone, head down and occasionally looking over her shoulder. Behind her was a suitcase being dragged along the ground behind her. Perhaps she was a runaway or a traveler? I moved through the crowd. All of them are so focused on their phones, conversations, or where they were going. They never realized that a monster moved amongst them. My instinct was to drag her in the darkness of the alleyway and begin my feast. It was easy to forget the fact that she was a person. We walked past one another. My senses became alive and saliva pulled in my mouth. Yet, there were people in that particular alleyway. I didn't want to have to kill too many. Excuse me. The words snapped me out of my thoughts. I looked down to see my potential victim looking up at me. The first time a victim ever spoke to me. I raised my eyebrows at her in an invitation for her to continue speaking. She was nervous, fidgeting, and I'm assuming she had run out of options. "Do you know where the bus stop is?" she asked. I studied her eyes. They were bloodshot and inflamed. There were heavy black bags under her pretty brown eyes. These were telltale signs of crying and sleepless nights. I smiled at her, just like I had been practicing in the mirror for decades. It looked less like a sneer and closer to a smile. Just around the corner, up that way," I answered, lazily pointing my hand, only to realize at that last moment that my hand was still covered in blood. I brought it down quickly and hid it. Fortunately, she didn't notice. I could hear her heartbeat and had to restrain myself from feasting in the middle of the street. It was difficult. The pulsing was intoxicating. An animalistic drive filled me, one that I struggled to contain every day. I looked past her into the reflection of one of the storefronts. I was average, bordering on handsome. I looked normal. From the outside, no one could tell what I truly was. No one could see the beast within. "Do you need help?" I asked. The human part of me still wanted to help her. If one monster noticed her, surely others would have as well. And this time, I would ensure she got to safety. She looked at me with relief. Her hopeful expression lit up to one of happiness, and I felt a pang of guilt in the pit of my stomach. This is why you're not supposed to speak to your prey. I reached into my coat pocket and fiddled with the archaic cross, a gift from my grandmother long ago, when I was still human. "Yes, I ran away from home to move in with my boyfriend," she began, embarrassed and glancing down towards the ground. "Things didn't work out and I'm trying to make my way back home." I wanted her to get home to her family. I forgot about the park on the way to the bus stop. The streetlights had turned on, and during the course of the events, I had forgotten the time. The urges were more difficult to stop during the nighttime. The instincts became stronger. She relaxed around me as we walked down the pathway towards the bus stop. I was her protector, and perhaps this was my redemption? It was getting colder. Condensation came from her breath as she shivered. I wanted to keep her warm. My skin no longer had warmth of its own. That time had long passed. "Are you cold?" I asked, as I removed my coat instinctively and forgot about the blood. She couldn't see it anyway. She smiled, nodded, and accepted while I draped it around her shoulders. I could see the goosebumps on her neck, and with a groan I turned and looked away as her heartbeat got louder. "Thank you," she answered, her voice soft and gentle. I was distracted by the beauty of the night. At least, that was what I told myself. As I looked up at the sparkling stars, my eyes were able to pick up more than a human's could, and noticed her shrink away from me. Her eyes filled with anger and fear. She had every right to do so, yet I could not escape why. My coat. The coat was still wet with blood. Look, I can explain, I began. I wanted to tell her I wasn't a monster. It wasn't my fault. To plead with her to listen to me. She opened her mouth to scream, and I couldn't have that. Swiftly, I leapt forward, grabbing her tightly and put my hand over her mouth to prevent her from screaming. The whimpers of just fear she made, the warmth of her skin, the blood in her veins. Slowly, I felt my resolve decline. The hunger took hold and my fangs sank deep into her neck. It is always how it starts. Just one bite.
"There it is," Mr. Everwood said. "The Freckman Tunnel." I gazed out at it. The reason for our 40-minute cart ride was an old, dilapidated train tunnel. The railroad tracks that led through it had been undisturbed for years. Weeds and other plants grew between the planks, and the planks themselves were rotting away. The tunnel itself seemed 10 minutes from collapsing. Even without the local legends calling the tunnel haunted, I still would have felt uneasy going in. So, what did the call say again? Everwood and I were rangers for the Freckman National Forest. Considering how many tourists showed up every year, we were basically babysitters. I could tell you horror story after horror story about people who almost burned down their campsite, sank their canoe, or angered a bear simply because they refused to admit that they didn't know what they were doing. But every now and then, someone would find themselves hopelessly lost, and it was the ranger's job to get them back to safety. At 5 this morning, a guy ran into the HQ, eyes wide. He said that he and his daughter had been hiking near the tunnel when he suddenly lost track of her. He looked around himself, panicked, and ran down the trail screaming for help until he got to HQ. We simply have to find the girl and bring her back. Easy. It was rarely easy. Anyone who's done 10 minutes worth of research on disappearances in national parks knows that not every person who vanishes is easily found. If it was, then I'd sleep a little easier at night. We got out of the cart and started to get our gear together. Along with Everwood and I, 3 other teams were searching the trails and area around the tunnel. There was a chance that the little girl had decided not to go in there, but it had been cloudy and humid all day, and the chances of a rainstorm were slowly climbing. Thus, so were the chances that she'd gone into the tunnel for shelter. If she had, then it was clear that she was a tourist. No sane local would go in there alone. 20 years ago, shortly before the Freckman Forest was declared a national park, the police department had experienced a sudden rush of missing children cases. Specifically, 8 children between the ages of 6 and 13. Nearly a year passed before the truth was discovered. A local construction worker had stumbled into the police station, eyes wide and breathing heavily, and admitted to kidnapping, torturing, and murdering all 8 of the children. He led them to the tunnel, showed them where the bodies were buried, and went quietly to prison. When asked why he confessed, as he'd never been suspected and might have gotten away clean, he answered with 4 words: "They told me to." He got life in prison. He's still alive and in his late 50s or early 60s. I've heard he still gets death threats in the mail. After the children's corpses were given proper burials, very strange reports started coming in regarding the tunnel. One woman, a math teacher to several of the murdered children, had been placing a bouquet of flowers at the mouth of the tunnel when she heard a small child crying. As she stepped in, the crying turned to a blood-curdling scream. She stepped out, and it stopped. Other such reports came in, most of them similar to the first. One man, an amateur paranormal investigator, had decided to walk the entire length of the tunnel with a handheld video camera. He was found a day later at the mouth of the tunnel, in a catatonic state. The camera seemed fine at first glance, but the tape had been destroyed beyond repair. It looked like it had been chewed to pieces. I'd first been told the story when I'd come to town for college. A few friends and I had even hiked up to the tunnel. We hadn't gone in. We hadn't even dared each other to. Still, there was a pull to it. Even if you didn't go in, you still wanted to see it. which is probably why we still got reports of creepy crap happening near or in the tunnel. Everwood gave me a friendly slap on the back, making me jump. "Come on, Ellison, we have a job to do." He put on his gloves and took his flashlight from his belt. He always wore gloves, even if it wasn't that cold out. We turned on our flashlights and started in. The tunnel is only about a mile long and cuts straight through the Freckman Mountain, which is more like a rocky hill than a mountain. You can actually see the other end of the tunnel from the opening. Still, it's incredibly dark in there, and the odd placement of the tunnel mouths mean that the wind rarely blows through. Other than some moss and earthworms, there wasn't any wildlife in there. Even bears avoided the tunnel. I doubted heavily that she was in there, but I called out her name. "Emily?" My voice reverberated off the stone walls and sounded out of place. I looked at Everwood. He gave me a smile, but his eyes betrayed him. He was as nervous as I was. We walked for a minute. What few breezes did blow through had brought in a few dead leaves. They crunched under our boots. As familiar as the sound was, I almost wished that they weren't there. The noise echoed off the walls and made it sound like there was an army walking through instead of two middle-aged men. While I knew I wouldn't see anything, I kept looking over my shoulder to make sure that it was just us two. I was about to suggest that we turn back, as she obviously wasn't in there, when Everwood signaled for me to stop. He pointed to the wall and shined his flashlight there. I copied him, expecting to see the girl or some hideous sight. It turned out to be neither. After the police had finished their work in the tunnel, the mayor had arranged for a plaque to be made and placed in the tunnel. In bold letters, it stated the names of the children and the fact that they'd been murdered at the spot where the plaque hung. It was covered in 20 years' worth of grime, but it was still readable. It still sent a shiver down my spine. At that point, we were halfway through. The end of the tunnel was becoming brighter and brighter. Still, it seemed like we were in pitch darkness when the flashlights went out. "The hell?" Everwood cursed as he blindly opened the battery compartment to his flashlight. "Let's just keep going." I didn't want to spend one more second in that tunnel. I wasn't just nervous anymore. I was scared. There was something about that tunnel, something about being in the exact place where those kids died that made me want to run. If I'd been alone, I would have already been running. Everwood must have heard the panic in my voice because he started walking forward again. I followed. I wanted him to go faster. I wanted out of there. I felt a cold hand slip into mine. I squeezed it. I always liked how Everwood wasn't afraid to show some friendly affection. I'd seen him hug lost hikers when they were scared and joke with scared little kids to help them relax. I let go of the hand as we got closer to the end, then I practically ran out. It had started raining while we were in the tunnel, and the daylight made my eyes scream in pain. I didn't care. I closed my eyes and felt the drops hitting my body. Everwood didn't ask me what I was doing. He just stood to the side. It wasn't long before my radio crackled to life. It was Ranger Suzuki, a member of one of the other teams. "We found the girl. She was over near the lake." "She okay?" "Affirmative. Just a little wet from the rain. Start heading back to HQ. 10-4. I put my radio back in its holster and told Everwood the good news. He looked relieved. We started heading back, this time walking around the tunnel. There was no need to hurry. Our shifts would be over by the time we got back. Once our cart was in sight, I really started to relax. Everwood? Yeah? Thanks for what you did in the tunnel. What? What do you mean? You know, I was embarrassed to say it, but finally just spat it out. Thanks for holding my hand. Everwood stopped dead. I stopped too, ready to argue. That's when I realized that Everwood was still wearing his gloves. The hand I'd held had been cold and bare. We looked at each other in pure terror, then broke into a run for our cart.
Every small town has that one legend about that one house, that one bridge, and that one dark forest. The town where I grew up was no exception. Our legend involved a long stretch of winding road that connected our town with the next town over. The real name of it is Black Forest Road, simply because it's surrounded entirely on both sides by a large mass of trees, making it nearly impossible to see at night. The town folks call it Angel's Run, because that's what they say angels would do. They would run from that road. Sounds a bit corny, I know, but it is what it is. They say that in the daytime, when the sun's out, the road is perfectly fine and it's used quite often. But when night falls, when darkness creeps over the land, it's a whole different ballgame. They say that road becomes a gateway to hell. Town folks believe in this legend so much that the town officials in both towns block off the roads with the large cement barriers at sundown to prevent anyone from driving on it. Then they open it back up at sunrise. That's a bit extreme, if you ask me. All over some stupid story, but people believe what they believe, and who am I to judge? I heard this story from my father back in '98 when I was 12, and he heard it from his father, who heard it from his father, and so on. One summer night, he took me to the barriers. We stood there and he told me the legend of Angel's Run. Legend has it that if you drive on that road at night, at some point, before you reach the end, your car would completely shut down for no reason. It would lose all electric power, leaving you stranded in the middle of nowhere, in total darkness. At this point, the wind will pick up drastically, blowing so hard it would shake your vehicle. You will start to hear chanting from the woods, growing louder as time goes by. You will start to hear the sound of babies crying in the wind, and an overwhelming feeling of dread fall upon you. Human instinct, in a situation like this, would tell you to run. If you stay in your car, you might live a little bit longer, but you're still gonna die. Whether you choose to stay in your car or run for your life, doesn't matter, because out of nowhere, through the dark, will appear two blinding lights right before you, at which time you will be ripped brutally apart by a pack of wraiths that ascend from the woods, ripping and tearing your flesh, devouring every piece of you and taking your soul to hell. It will just take longer if you stay in your car. My father put his arm around me and we walked home together. I must admit, the story scared the shit out of me when I was 12. But now that I've just turned 30 and thought about it, I think it's all a crock of shit. So here I stand, at the barriers, about to climb over. I'm writing this on my cell phone, and I will post it before I do. Here I go. Wish me luck. Okay, so just made it over the barrier. I skinned my knee up pretty good climbing over the top. Hurts like a sumbitch. I'm okay though. I put my phone on auto post, so it'll write and post everything I say in real time. Well, I may have underestimated the situation. It's fucking dark and creepy. I can't even see my hand directly in front of my face. The air is stale and thick, and it's cold. Oh my god, is it cold. It's June, It was like 80 degrees out there, but in here, it's like 30. I can't get the flashlight on my phone to work. I'm starting to freak out. You know what? Fuck this. I'm out of here. What the hell? Where'd the barriers go? I was standing right in front of them. I turned around and they're gone. Like they weren't even there. What the fuck's going on? This can't be happening. Help me. Somebody. Somebody come help me. Okay, stop. Calm down. I'm a mature, rational adult. There's gotta be an explanation for all of this. I'll just start walking, and I'll eventually come to the end. Every road has a beginning and an end, right? Okay, just shut up and walk. I've been walking for about an hour now. Could be longer, I don't know. Nothing's really happened. No chanting, no crying babies. I'm fucking freezing though. Wait, what was that? Thunder? No? Raindrops? Fuck, it's starting to rain. I'm freezing and now it's fucking raining? Great. I know about that legend crap, but there's definitely some fucked up shit going on here. Oh my god, there's the lights. But they're way off in the distance. And they're moving. Moving towards me. The coyotes are starting to howl. I can hear them. That can't be good. Something's moving in the trees. Oh my god, this is it. I'm gonna die. I love you, Mom. I love you, Dad. I should have listened. I should have never came here. Oh god, I don't want to die. It stopped. What the fuck? I'm still alive? I think I am anyways. I think I just pissed myself a little. Man, this place is fucked up. The lights are getting closer now. About 50 feet away. What? Is that a car? No. It's a taxi. There are no taxis in this town. I didn't even get on this road. There's barriers on both ends. I think... What the fuck? Don't do it. What was that? A voice in my right ear. Don't do it. There it is again. That voice. My left ear now. Seriously? It's dark, I'm freezing, it's raining, and now I'm hearing fucking voices? I think I'm losing my mind. This is fucking nuts. I don't know about the wrath part in the legend, or even the legend itself, because this ain't nothing like that. This is worse. This could definitely be the gateway to hell, though. The taxi's slowing down now. It's stopping right in front of me. Don't do it. What the fuck? How'd I get in here? I don't remember opening the door. Last thing I remember was standing outside. Where are we going? I can't see shit out these windows. What the fuck is that smell? Wait a minute. I can see in here. Is that blood? Pieces of flesh? All around the inside of this thing? What the hell am I sitting on? Oh my god, it's a hand. And there's a leg and a skull. Holy fuck, I think I'm gonna puke. I gotta get out of here. Why won't the fucking door open? Why are we stopping? There's that chanting. But it's coming from in here? And the babies? Those fucking babies, they're in my head. The legend is real, but they got it wrong. Where are we?
Michael,
I just heard my name. Who the fuck was that?
pay me now.
Fuck you, I'm not paying you shit. Let me out of here.
Pay me now.
Who are you?
It's the Wraith.
What are you doing? Get off of me.
The Witch's Den by me, Insidious Nebula. When you think of your childhood home, what is it you recall? Warmth, love, the smell of home cooking, and the sound of laughs echoing throughout the halls. I'm sure for most of you this is the case. Your childhood home should awaken memories of nostalgia and happiness deep within your mind. It is the place of your upbringing, after all. My sister, Elaine, and I do not have this luxury. We are in our 30s now, but the presence of that wicked place still exists within both of us. Only malice was present in those four walls in which we grew up. All we have left are the bitter memories of that place and the bond we formed through surviving that hell. We even have a special name for our childhood home, the Witch's Den. We only speak about it to each other, and this name is sort of our own little code. Due to the trauma, it rarely comes up. Our parents were blissfully unaware of the evil that had soaked into every crevice of that structure. All we had was our trust and love for one another. We have tried to forget, but the darkest memories hold the most power over us, it seems. We were children back then, some 20 years ago, innocent and naive. We had experienced many odd things in the Witch's Den over the years. We thought nothing of it. Disembodied voices, lurking shadows, unexplained footsteps, and other noises, to name a few. However, all of this came to a head in the final year of our living in that house. On one night, a thunderstorm raged outside. Wind whistled against the window, and lightning occasionally lit up our room. The loud booms of thunder shook the walls intermittently. My sister and I shared a room up until we moved from that house when I was 13, and she was 10. Anyways, that night we had settled into our beds, and soon after, drifted off to sleep. Hours passed until I was awoken by an odd sound. A low, resounding creaking noise seemed to be coming from the foot of my bed. My eyes peeled open and my vision was blurry. The alarm clock read 3:36 a.m. I looked around the room as my breathing increased rapidly, along with my heartbeat. I saw nothing but the outlines of furniture in our bedroom and my sister sleeping peacefully in her bed. A boom resounded, and a sudden flash of lightning cloaked the room in a blinding light. In the brief moment of light, I saw long, bony fingers wrapped tightly on the wooden frame at the foot of my bed. I laid there in silence and noticed that Elaine, too, was now awake. Even in the darkness, she appeared to be looking directly at me. "Norma, there's someone underneath your bed," she stuttered nervously. "She's coming out." I could hear the fear in her voice. What met my ears next was the heinous tapping of fingernails on wood. Tap, tap, tap. Another clap of thunder was followed by another burst of light. In the brief moment, I saw her, a freakishly tall and gaunt woman standing at the foot of my bed. Her long, black and matted hair covered her entire face. She wore a pitch-black dress that was torn and dirty, as if she had been buried alive in it. Most distinguishable was the noose that hung around her neck. Her arms were abnormally long and dangled in front of her. She had long fingers and even longer, unkempt nails. The light receded, and there was silence. But this silence was soon shattered. A soft, raspy breathing filled the air, as well as indecipherable whispering. More thunder, and then another strike of lightning. In the light, I finally saw her face. Her yellowed and jagged teeth had shifted to form a sinister grin. Her eyes glowed yellow, and her pupils were slit like a cat. This was all I saw before she lunged at me, and her insidious cackle filled the air. I felt her fingers tighten around my throat as she began strangling me and digging her fingernails into my neck. She wanted to kill me. She intended to choke the life out of me. This was evil incarnate, I was sure of that. Elaine was screaming and crying just across the room, a wreck of nerves. I clenched my eyes as tightly as I could while trying to bite this bitch off of me, just when I thought I was going to pass out due to a lack of oxygen. Our bedroom door swung open, and our light was flipped on, eradicating the darkness. When I opened my eyes, the witch was gone. My mother had me wrapped in her embrace. My father stood at the doorway. He looked pissed and skeptical. We told them what had happened, but they didn't believe us. I mean, who would, right? They assumed we were having nightmares, and that was the end of that. The normal thing for children. We saw in that moment that all we had was each other. Our parents do not believe in such things. I found out much later that Elaine had seen her before as well, peering from windows and skulking around the house, but never that close. Following this incident, my father got a new job, and we had to relocate. My sister and I were beyond relieved. We would finally be free from the grip of the witch's den. The day we moved out, as we were walking through the foyer to the front door, the witch stood triumphant at the top of the stairs, her grin visible, and her yellow eyes peering into our souls. That cackle, that damned cackle meeting our ears one final time as we closed the door on that chapter of our lives. Elaine and I left behind that evil place, but as I've said, the memories have remained. 20 years later, my sister and I are still terrified to sleep in the dark. 20 years later, we still feel as though we are being watched. 20 years later, the thought of sleeping still terrifies us both. The witch left her mark on us in one way or another. It's funny. Elaine was telling me the other day that she, her husband, and her children have been experiencing strange occurrences at her house. Mysterious sounds and whatnot. I've told her she might want to consult a priest. I really hope she takes my advice. The witch, if anything, taught us that the paranormal does exist, and it should not be taken lightly. I write this as I'm laying in bed next to my husband. He is fast asleep and dead to the world. My son is also asleep. The house is quiet. My nightlight burns beside me, warding away the darkness. But it's the oddest thing. I swear that I hear a creaking noise somewhere in my room. Tap, tap, tap.
This is only brief but scared me for the longest time. I used to live in a very isolated rural town with a population of approximately 120 people. And as expected, I knew everyone there. My best friend and I were your typical benign teenage delinquents, and our favorite game at the time was an activity we referred to as Dead Fred. We would stuff a full-length wetsuit with newspaper, dress it in long sleeves and jeans, and leave it lying in the middle of the street at nighttime. Meanwhile, we'd be hiding in the bushes, laughing and musing on the various reactions of those who came across the scene. One night, a car seemingly didn't even notice Dead Fred and drove right over top of him at lightning speed. The driver screeched to a stop about 50 meters away and got out of the car. I recognized him. It was a close friend's dad, a recent retired accountant, who I knew well and had been my rugby coach for the last few seasons. He looked unstable, possibly shaken, but likely drunk. Drinking and driving was quite common in such a small country town. Without hesitation, he pulled a rifle out of the trunk of his car and fired several shots at the corpse from afar and drove away. My friend and I kept this to ourselves, and as far as I know, we're the only two who know. The driver remained a close family friend, continued to coach me in rugby, and has since had grandchildren. I still see him when I go home for the holidays. As far as I know, he never fessed up to the incident and carried on his life for the next 23 years and into the present day, as if nothing ever happened.
Make a Deal with Me. Written and narrated by Lady Spookaria. She sighed to herself as she gazed down into her drink. How long ago had her life been perfect? A good job, a loving fiancé, a beautiful home, and even better prospects. Her gaze lingered in her reflection, focused on her incredibly dull expression, and she could have sworn she had aged several decades in a matter of days. There was no pain anymore. She accepted her fate readily, and knew deep down this was all part of the bargain she had foolishly made. She wouldn't have ended up in this dive bar with questionable-looking people inside. She knew exactly where she went wrong. Her thoughts went back to that night. She had been furious with that bitch Nicole who had beaten her, again, for the promotion at work she had her eye on. That she had been grinding for months to achieve, and she just waltzes in, gets it. All her hard work had been for nothing. She had to endure the indignity of having to teach her new boss how to do her job. Everything was going wrong. Her boyfriend had left her the day before. It hadn't been the best relationship to begin with, and she wasn't sure she was supposed to be with him. Still, it didn't make it any easier. She found out that he had stolen from her on his way out and left a little present behind for her. Nothing was working anymore. She lifted a cigarette to her lips, the only pleasure she had left, and tried to get her lighter to light. It wouldn't work. Fucking hell, she groaned, and was about to spit out her only source of happiness when a lit lighter appeared from an elegant hand in front of her. Her gaze followed the arm up and saw an enchanting face. Feline-like eyes gazed down at her. Her red hair curled and framed her face, Whoever she was well dressed. It was difficult to tell how old she was. There was a timeless energy about her. The stranger held the lighter steady while she lit her cigarette. In a blur, the lighter disappeared with a click of the stranger's fingertips. She had to admit she was entranced, completely drawn in by her. The stranger was alluring, and she felt torn between wanting to be her and a desire to be with her. It seems like you're in a bit of trouble, aren't you? The stranger's voice was an intoxicating purr. The words took her completely by surprise, and she was rendered speechless. Without invitation, the alluring stranger took a seat beside her. She could not stop looking at those eyes. I know you are. Or you wouldn't have called me, the stranger winked and continued. Your life has not gone according to plan, has it? You were with a man when you prefer women. That job you fight for means nothing to you. The friends you call sisters mean nothing to you. And you know they have betrayed you over trivial things. How did you know any of this? The stranger lifted her elegant shoulders in a shrug, a devilish smirk on her lips, and evaded the question. What if I could give you everything you truly desired? Money, power, the perfect job, a beautiful girlfriend to call your own, and revenge on those who ever wronged you. She thought about it. Everything she ever longed for was offered to her. Her imagination began to run wild to a point she didn't realize the stranger draped her arm around her. She was pulled close and felt the stranger's breath on the back of her neck. You could have it all, and more if you desired it. What was there to lose? She had nothing else going for her, and how could she resist the alluring stranger? She felt a hand under her chin and turned to see the stranger's red lips, before her gaze lifted to the stranger's eyes. Now she was closer. She could see that the eyes weren't quite feline, but still, their faces were centimeters apart from each other. The stranger leaned in for a kiss. The caress was gentle. For a brief moment, reality hit her, and she saw the stranger for what she truly was, a beast in human form. The fangs were pointed, sharp, and ready. The stranger's smooth skin was coarse to the touch. She could have sworn she heard a rough, monstrous laugh at her realization. The alarm clock blared loudly. She awoke to a start inside a strange apartment. One far more expensive than hers had been. She felt by her side. She was alone, but knew the signs that someone else had been there. She wrapped the sheet around her nude body into a makeshift dress before walking into the expensive kitchen. It alone was bigger than her entire apartment. She blinked and maybe it all could have been a dream. Well, hello, sleepyhead. She turned to see the woman of her dreams. What she desired but never had the courage to go out and find. Wait, who are you? I could have sworn that... She was pulled into a passionate kiss, one that she absolutely did not fight. What's gotten into you? Bad dream? She asked, took her by the hand and led her towards the table while she poured a drink for her. Everything was perfect. There were no remnants of my former life. I was out of the closet and with the woman of my dreams. Perhaps my life before had been the nightmare and this was reality, she thought to herself. I'm sorry, I need to check something. I'll be back in a minute. She stuttered, stood and rushed to the room she had been sleeping. Like a caged beast, she paced around the foot of the bed and finally caught sight of a laptop, one in a far better condition than her old one had been. She opened it, took a guess, and used her typical password. Even in this fancy new world, she used the same damn password. She logged in to check her bank account, and, there was more money in there than her entire family possessed. She could afford to pay all her bills, travel, invest, and do anything she ever wanted to. She could live the life she always wanted. Next, she took the time to check out her social media. It turns out her girlfriend's name was Marie, and they looked happy together in all the pictures. But the memories, they didn't feel right, and they certainly didn't feel genuine. She still wanted them though. She wanted them more than anything. There was always time to find a way out of the deal. There had to be, and she had time. Marie stood by the door watching for a moment, her hair loose around her shoulders, and her green eyes lingered on her. I was going to wait until we were on holiday. I couldn't resist though, Marie said, opened up a drawer in the vanity and pulled out a small red velvet covered case. Her heart skipped a beat. Marie went down on one knee to propose to her. The ring slipped on her finger, and they kissed before intimately celebrating. After this, she forgot about the deal, and got used to her new life. The stranger knew she would forget. They always did. When the stranger came to collect, the one she made a deal with hid inside a church while she waited outside. The stranger was surprisingly patient. It wasn't the first time one of her beloveds had decided not to fulfill their part of the bargain. Come now. I get what I want eventually, and it is foolish of you to refuse me, the stranger taunted. If you don't come out, I will slowly remove each thing you had, piece by piece. All until you beg me to claim you. The one she made a deal with did not answer. We will see how long you manage to hold out for, the stranger said, and then disappeared into a puff of smoke. Instantly, the deal maker regretted her decision. Why didn't I take the steps I needed to take before making a deal with her? I had the time to do it. I was still young, and who knows? Perhaps I would have been happy out of the closet, she thought to herself. Things began to get worse. Somehow she ended up at the dive bar, pouring her secrets out to the bartender. First, I lost my ring, and naturally my girlfriend was angry with me. It didn't take long before I lost my job and she lost hers. We fought over everything. But there was one thing that finally broke us up, but I can't even remember what it was. I found out she was cheating on me, lying, and that she only wanted me for my money. We lost that beautiful apartment I'd been so proud of. I can't afford to visit the doctor, but I have strange lumps all over my body. I don't know what they are. I guess you could say that I'm sorry, you know? I'm sorry I didn't make it happen on my own. The bartender listened, glanced at his watch, and it wasn't the first time one of the unfortunates had come to visit him. He scrubbed a picture and turned to yell some colourful obscenity at two bikers who were randomly fighting in the background. You gonna be alright? I can help you, he offered. No, I won't be. I can't help you unless you agree to it. I know things look bad right now, but you're safe here. It's a bit rough, but it's a refuge, he continued, tirelessly cleaning, and watched her with kind eyes. I don't think you can help me, she added sadly, but looked up at him with a grateful smile. She can't get in. Wait, how did he know who her adversary was? If you agree, I can protect you. Otherwise, it needs to run its course. Help me, she whispered softly. He reached out his hand to touch her shoulder. Immediately she began to feel sleepy. She blinked twice before she fell into a dreamless sleep. And soon her heart came to a stop. and she was free.
Late one night, long after my family had been sent home, the crooked lady staggered alongside my hospital bed, moving the way you'd expect someone with a broken spine and shattered legs to. I could hear her slow, labored inhales and taste the stench of her breath. She tapped my forehead with a cold finger, pulled my eyelids back, and then placed what felt like leeches all over my face. Later, I discovered they weren't normal leeches. They were capped with 3 narrow slits for eyes and a mouth, like a human face at the end of a slimy black strip. As they latched onto me, I felt a strange, chilling sensation and terror like I'd never known before. All I could do is lie helplessly and pray for it to end. The crooked lady pulled the leeches off and swallowed them whole. And then she disappeared, leaving me gasping for lungfuls of air. At first, I thought it was a nightmare. But she came back the next night. And the next. Sometimes she spoke while she worked, shushing me when I gasped, or saying things like, "Almost done," when my body spasmed. Her voice had a hard, raspy texture to it. This continued until one night, after collecting the leeches, she looked into my eyes again. She nodded, stepped back, and then whispered, "One more session should do it." This time, the chilling sensation remained after she had gone. When I woke up, bars of sunlight were cast through the blinds. It was a beautiful day outside, but I still felt cold, numb. I pushed the emergency call button on the side of my bed. A minute passed, then several. I mashed the button again and again. Nothing happened. I rolled out of bed and fell to the floor. It felt like my legs hadn't been used in years. Resting on a chair in the corner was a baseball bat and a card from my daughter. It read, "Get well soon, Daddy. I left you my lucky bat to help you get better faster." My daughter had called it her lucky bat since she hit 2 game-winning home runs with it back to back. Since I was too busy with work, I'd missed both. All I could think about was seeing my family again. I stumbled to the hall and tried calling for help, but my mouth was so dry I could barely manage a whisper. I made my way to the nurse's station and collapsed in front of 2 doctors. They continued with their conversation like I wasn't even there. It sounded like they were speaking underwater. At first, I thought I was dreaming or having a crazy hallucination, but as the dizziness passed, I became more aware of my surroundings. The patients complaining, the sterile smell, it felt too real. It couldn't be a dream. But something was wrong. The ward and everything in it looked like it had been taken from an old, discolored photo and shrouded in mist. I shook doctors and pushed nurses with what little strength I had. They all ignored me. Solid objects barely moved when I tried picking them up or knocking them aside. It was like being trapped behind an invisible barrier, unable to manipulate the world. I'd become a ghost. As naive as it sounds, I believed my family would be able to see me and that if I could just make it home, everything would be okay. It was like stumbling through fog. Every so often I'd collide with an echo of the world and use it to guide my way. When I finally arrived, I called my wife's name. She spun around and smiled. And for a moment, I thought she had seen me. But then my daughter walked past and hugged her mom. I slumped back against the wall, watching them sit down to eat, completely oblivious to my presence. For hours, I tried making them notice me. I held my daughter in my arms and felt the warmth of her breath against my cheek. A flicker of recognition flashed across her face. "It's me!" I cried. "I'm here! I love you!" Her lip trembled, and my wife asked what was wrong. "I was thinking about Daddy." I broke down and sobbed. I couldn't resign myself to this. There had to be a way back. I didn't understand what was going on, but I knew the Crooked Lady was responsible. If she stayed true to her word, she'd be paying me one last visit. Perhaps there was a way to undo whatever she had done. It wasn't a great plan, but it was all I had. I took one last look around the house, memorizing every detail. I kissed my daughter on the forehead and said, "I love you." She shivered as a tear ran down her cheek. I made my way back to the hospital and waited. Hours passed. From the quiet of the hall, I heard the unsteady steps. My throat tightened as they drew closer. I peeked behind the door just in time to see the Crooked Lady burst forward, knocking me clean across the room. "You weren't supposed to wake up," she groaned. I lay on my back, winded. She reached out to grab me, but I caught her withered wrist with both hands. With the devil's strength, she thrust it towards my neck and touched the fingertips to my throat. Darkness crept to the edge of my vision. I pushed my feet against her chest and kicked with all of my strength. She collided with the bedside monitor and fell to the ground. When she stood, I got my first proper look at her and retched. Her torso was misaligned from her legs and her jaw from the rest of her head. She charged, arms outstretched and elbows facing the wrong way, revealing more bends and twists than any human should ever have. She grabbed my throat and pinned me against the wall. My toes barely scraped the floor. The leeches slithered down her arms and onto my face. One lingered on her hand for a moment and stared. The horrible sensation returned, more intense than ever before. An indescribable pain. I drove my thumbs into the Crooked Lady's eyes, but my hands started fading away. She smiled at my panicked reaction. In a last, desperate effort, I tried to pry her hand off my throat. I touched something slimy. It was a leech. I pulled it off my neck and squeezed as hard as I could, and it made a disgusting squelch. The Crooked Lady wheezed and groaned. It hurt her. I grabbed another one. She pulled me back and slammed me against the wall, hard. There was a moment of blinding pain as my vision blurred, and then a trickle of blood ran down my forehead. I kept hold of the leech and pinched it between my finger and thumb. Squelch. Her grip loosened. She shrieked in pain, and I was free. I snatched more leeches off my face and crushed them. The Crooked Lady staggered and whirled around, roaring curses. She flailed her arms, knocking both me and a ventilator clean across the room. The ventilator collided with the chair in the corner and knocked it over. My daughter's bat fell into my lap. I could touch it. I wiped blood from my eyes and scrambled to my feet as the crooked lady twisted her head right around to face me. I swung the bat straight into her nose. She hissed and spat. She lurched forward but was too slow. I swung in a downward arc and smashed the crown of her head. I followed her around the room, landing more blows. She made a sound like a cat coughing up a furball, then vomited a torrent of sticky, black bile. It spewed from her mouth like a fountain. Trapped in it were more leeches. They tried crawling towards me but were stuck in the black substance, a few threads of which were still hanging out of the crooked lady's mouth. I stomped one, and she groaned. And then I stomped again and again. She writhed and contorted worse than before. Steam rose from her body and she wailed like a banshee. Now I'd returned to normal, and she was the one fading away. There was only one leech left, but nauseous from my injury, I fell onto my back and dropped the bat. A hospital light spun above my head. The crooked lady crawled on top of me and raised a hand to my throat one last time. I fumbled for the last leech and found it and squeezed. The last thing I remember was a nurse running into the room. When I woke up, my family were at my side. After a tearful reunion, a doctor walked in with a furrowed brow. He wanted to know how I'd managed to wake up from a coma, split my head open, and trash the room, all without being noticed. For a moment, I considered telling him the whole ordeal, but decided against it. So far as I could tell, they'd found no trace of the crooked lady. I played dumb. Told them I couldn't remember a thing. They blamed it on the coma. When the nurse said it was time to get some rest, my daughter gave me one last hug. She squeezed so hard, I couldn't breathe. But I didn't complain. I thanked her for leaving me her lucky bat and told her I was sorry for missing her games and promised it would never happen again. As she walked away, I shouted, "I love you!" I can't even begin to describe the joy I felt when she turned around, looked me in the eye, and replied, "I love you too, Daddy."
Please leave your message